Something happened to you today. Maybe it was small, a rude comment, a plan falling apart, someone who didn't show up the way you needed them to. And yet, here you are, still carrying it, still heavy. That's the thing nobody talks about. It's rarely the big catastrophes that break us. It's the accumulation of small moments we never learned to release. The traffic that tightened your jaw, the email that ruined your morning, the silence from someone whose approval you were quietly waiting for. We are not broken by life. We are broken by our relationship with life, by the gap between what we expected and what arrived. Over 2,000 years ago, a group of thinkers decided to study that gap. They were called the Stoics. Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca. They didn't promise to remove life's difficulty. They promised something far more powerful, the ability to meet difficulty without being destroyed by it. That's what this video is. 13 lessons. Each one a tool, each one sharper than the last. Not philosophy for lecture halls, philosophy for the moment your hands are shaking and you need to think clearly. Stay with this. The lesson you almost skipped might be the one that changes everything. Before we begin, if you're ready to stop letting life control you and start controlling how you respond to it, type "I am unshakable" in the comments. Let's see who's here and ready. Lesson 1. Every Stoic philosopher, regardless of their background, regardless of whether they were an emperor or a former slave, began from the same foundational truth. There are things within your control, and there are things that are not. And the single greatest source of human suffering is the refusal to honor that distinction. Epictetus called this the dichotomy of control. He was a man who knew suffering intimately. Born into slavery, he built an entire philosophy from the only thing no master could ever take from him: his mind, his ability to choose how he responded to his circumstances. And from that single insight, he became one of the most influential thinkers in human history. Think about the last time you were genuinely upset. What was it about? Chances are it involved something you couldn't control. Another person's behavior, an outcome that didn't go your way, circumstances that shifted beneath your feet. And yet, your mind treated it like a problem you were obligated to solve, like if you worried enough, replayed it enough, argued hard enough in your own head, you could somehow reverse what had already happened. You can't. And the Stoics were brutally honest about that. But here's where it gets interesting. They weren't pessimists, they were liberators. Because once you truly accept that you cannot control the storm, something extraordinary happens. You stop wasting your energy fighting the wind, and you start learning to manage your sails. Your sails are your thoughts, your interpretations, your values, your responses. These belong entirely to you, and no circumstance, no person, no tragedy can commandeer them without your permission. That's not a motivational slogan. That's a structural truth about the nature of the human mind. So here is the first lesson, and it requires practice, not just understanding. Before you react to anything today, pause and ask yourself, is this within my control? If yes, act. If no, release. Not because releasing is easy, because holding on to what you cannot change is the most expensive thing you will ever do with your attention. The storm will come, it always does. But you are not the storm. You are the sailor, and sailors don't curse the ocean, they learn it. Lesson 2. There is a voice inside your head that narrates your life, and the terrifying part, the part most people never examine, is that they believe every word it says. Epictetus wrote something that should stop you cold. Men are disturbed not by things, but by the opinions about things. Read that again. not by things, by opinions about things. The event isn't the problem. Your interpretation of the event is the problem. And interpretations, unlike events, are things you can actually change. Here's a scenario. Your manager walks past you without saying good morning. Your mind immediately begins constructing a story. They're upset with you. You said something wrong. Your job is in danger. You spend the rest of your day distracted, anxious, mentally rehearsing conversations that haven't happened. And at the end of the day, you find out your manager was dealing with a personal emergency and hadn't even noticed the hallway. You suffered an entire day, not because of reality, but because of a story you authored and then believed without question. This is what the Stoics understood about the human mind that modern psychology has spent decades confirming. We are not rational beings who occasionally feel things. We are storytelling beings who occasionally examine those stories. The default setting of the mind is narrative, and most of those narratives are catastrophic first drafts. The practice here isn't to suppress your thoughts or replace them with false positivity. The practice is to develop what Marcus Aurelius called the observer mind, the part of you that watches your thoughts without being swept away by them. The part that asks, is this thought true? Is it useful? Or is it just familiar? Because familiar and true are not the same thing. Many of your most limiting beliefs feel true simply because you've thought them thousands of times. Repetition creates conviction, but conviction isn't evidence. You have been carrying thoughts about yourself, about your worth, your capability, your future, that were handed to you years ago by people who were also just guessing. You adopted them, and you've been defending them ever since. Today's lesson: challenge the story before you live it. Your thoughts are the narrators of your experience. Make sure they're telling the truth. Lesson 3. At some point in your life, something hurt you deeply. And the natural human response to that pain was to ask, why is this happening to me? As if suffering were an injustice, a mistake, something that was never supposed to arrive at your door. The Stoics had a radically different question. Not, why is this happening to me? But, what is this here to teach me? Seneca wrote, difficulties strengthen the mind, as labor does the body. And that's not just a poetic line, it's a physiological truth dressed in philosophy. The human body grows stronger under resistance. Muscles don't develop in comfort. They develop when fibers tear and repair, when the body is pushed just beyond its current limit. The mind works exactly the same way. But here's where most people make the critical mistake. When pain arrives, grief, failure, rejection, loss, the instinct is to escape it as quickly as possible. Distract, numb, avoid, and those strategies work in the short term. But pain that is avoided doesn't disappear. It relocates. It embeds itself into your nervous system, into your patterns, into the unconscious rules you make about life without realizing you're making them. The person who was rejected in love and never truly processed it doesn't just move on. They build walls. They interpret new relationships through the lens of old wounds. They call it being realistic, when what it really is unprocessed pain wearing a practical coat. Stoicism doesn't ask you to enjoy suffering. That's a misreading of the philosophy. It asks you to meet suffering with clarity, with steadiness, with the honest acknowledgement that pain is a signal, not a sentence. A signal that something matters to you. A signal that you are being asked to grow. Marcus Aurelius lost children. He governed an empire at war. He dealt with betrayal, illness, and grief that would flatten most people entirely. and yet his private journals, never meant to be published, reveal a man who returned again and again to the practice of finding meaning in difficulty, not because life was fair, because meaning was a choice he could make regardless of what arrived. Pain is not your enemy. Resistance to growth is your enemy. Pain is just the knock on the door. Lesson 4. Nobody likes to hear this one, but it's probably the lesson that will do the most work for you, because the ego is invisible to the person carrying it and devastating to everyone around them. The ego, in Stoic terms, is not simply arrogance. It's the part of you that is addicted to being right, the part that can't receive feedback without getting defensive, the part that turns every conversation into a subtle competition, the part that needs recognition to feel validated, the part that, when threatened, reacts before it thinks. Marcus Aurelius, a man who held more power than almost anyone in the ancient world, spent his private journals warning himself against ego. He wrote to himself about the importance of humility repeatedly, as if he knew how easily power could seduce a person into believing they were exempt from ordinary human flaws. That's remarkable. He didn't trust the position to keep him grounded. He built a daily practice of self-examination to do it instead. Here's how the ego quietly sabotages your life. When you can't admit you were wrong, you stop learning. When you need to win every argument, you lose relationships. When you tie your self-worth to your achievements, every setback becomes an identity crisis. When you require constant external validation, you give strangers the keys to your emotional stability. The ego keeps a ledger. Every perceived slight is recorded. Every moment of disrespect demands compensation, and you exhaust yourself maintaining that ledger, not because you're a bad person, but because you were never taught that your worth isn't something that needs to be defended. Stoicism teaches that your value doesn't come from your status, your accomplishments, or other people's opinions of you. It comes from your character, from how you act when no one is watching, from the alignment between what you believe and how you live. And character doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need applause. It just needs practice. The antidote to ego isn't self-deprecation or constant self-criticism. It's honest self-awareness. The willingness to ask, am I reacting from principle right now, or am I protecting my pride? That question, asked consistently, will save you more relationships, more energy, and more peace than almost anything else you'll do. Ego says, I need to be right. Wisdom says, I need to be better. Choose wisely, because you can't hold both at once. Lesson 5. This might be the most uncomfortable lesson, and also the most clarifying. The Stoics had a practice called memento mori, a Latin phrase meaning, remember that you will die. Roman generals returning from victory would have a servant ride beside them, whispering those words as the crowds cheered. Not as a punishment, as a calibration, a reminder that the applause was temporary, the glory was fleeting, and the only thing that truly mattered was how you used the time you were given. We live in a culture that buries death. We don't talk about it. We don't plan for it. We treat it like a distant rumor about something that happens to other people, and because of that avoidance, we waste enormous amounts of life on things that genuinely do not matter, petty arguments that consume weeks of emotional energy, grudges maintained for years against people we rarely even think about, ambitions postponed indefinitely because the timing never feels quite right. Memento Mori asks a sharp question. If you knew this was one of your last days, would you spend it the way you're planning to spend today? Not as a guilt trip, as a compass. Because most people don't need more time. They need more clarity about what deserves the time they already have. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "It is not death that a man should fear, but he should fear never beginning to live." That line carries weight because he meant it structurally. Most of us spend our lives preparing to live rather than actually living, waiting for the right moment, the right mood, the right circumstances, and life slips through the gap between preparation and arrival. When you genuinely internalize your own mortality, not as a morbid obsession but as a quiet daily awareness, something shifts in your priorities. The things that once felt urgent reveal themselves as trivial. The things you've been postponing reveal themselves as essential. The people you've been meaning to call feel immediately important. The version of yourself you've been meaning to become feels suddenly possible. Death is the one appointment none of us can cancel. And the Stoics believed that accepting that appointment, sitting with it, feeling its weight, was not a source of despair. It was a source of tremendous freedom. You have a finite number of mornings left. How you use this one is entirely up to you. Lesson 6. Modern self-help tells you to visualize success, to see the outcome you want, feel it, believe it's already yours, and there's value in that. But the Stoics went somewhere more interesting and more powerful. They visualized failure. This practice is called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils, the deliberate mental rehearsal of what could go wrong. Seneca wrote, "Let us prepare our minds as if we had come to the very end of life. Let us postpone nothing." He wasn't advocating pessimism, he was advocating preparedness, and with it a kind of psychological armor that positive thinking alone can never provide. Here's the counterintuitive logic. When you imagine the worst-case scenario, really walk through it, feel what it would be like, ask yourself how you would survive it. Two things happen. First, you realize the worst case is almost never as catastrophic as your anxiety makes it seem. The fear of a thing is almost always larger than the thing itself. Seneca said, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." And that's not just wisdom, it's measurable. Second, you stop being ambushed. Life can only truly shatter someone who was completely unprepared. When you've already sat with the possibility of loss, failure, or pain, you meet it with familiarity rather than shock. Think of a bridge engineer. They don't design bridges by imagining everything going well. They test for maximum load, for wind resistance, for structural failure points. Because a bridge that has never been stress tested is a bridge waiting to collapse at the worst possible moment. Premeditatio malorum is the stress test you apply to your own life before reality does it for you. This practice also radically reduces the power of anxiety. Anxiety thrives in vagueness, in the formless sense that something might go wrong. When you force that vague dread into specificity, it shrinks. You ask, what exactly am I afraid of? What's the realistic worst case? Can I survive it? Have others survived worse? And almost always the answer is yes. Yes, it would be hard, and yes, you would find a way through. This is not pessimism. This is the radical courage to look at life honestly, shadows and all, and decide that none of it is enough to stop you. That's not the posture of someone who expects to fail. That's the posture of someone who refuses to be surprised by difficulty. Prepare for the storm and then move forward anyway. Lesson 7. You have felt emotions your entire life, and at some point, probably when you were very young, you made an unconscious agreement with them that they were you. That when anger arrived, you were an angry person. That when sadness arrived, you were a broken person. That when fear arrived, it meant you were incapable. The Stoics rejected this entirely. And the rejection wasn't cold or clinical, it was deeply humane because it returned agency to the person who had surrendered it to their feelings. Here's the distinction that changes everything. You are not your emotions. You are the awareness that experiences your emotions. Those are not the same thing. The rain is not the sky. The wave is not the ocean. Your fear, your anger, your grief, they move through you. They are weather. You are the climate. Marcus Aurelius wrote about the power of creating a pause between stimulus and response. That pause, even a breath long, is where your freedom lives. In that pause, you're not suppressing the emotion, you're observing it. You're noticing, I feel anger right now, not I am anger right now. That single grammatical shift carries enormous psychological weight. Because when you identify as the emotion, you become it, you act from it, you say things you can't unsay, you make decisions you wouldn't make in clarity, you burn bridges over moments that won't matter in a week, and afterwards you tell yourself a story about the kind of person you are, based on behavior you generated in your least conscious state. The Stoics weren't advocating emotional suppression. Seneca wrote openly about grief, about longing, about the weight of love and loss. These were not emotionless men, they were emotionally intelligent men in the truest sense. They felt deeply. They simply refused to be governed by what they felt. The practice is this. The next time a strong emotion arrives, name it out loud if you can. I notice I'm feeling anxious. I notice I'm feeling hurt. The act of naming creates distance. Distance creates choice. Choice creates the person you want to be, rather than the person your emotions temporarily convince you that you are. You are not the storm passing through you. You have never been the storm. You are the one watching it, breathing through it, and choosing what to do once it passes. That watcher is steadier than any emotion. That watcher is the real you, and it never left. Lesson 8. There is a quiet tyranny that most people live under every single day, and it doesn't come from a boss, a government, or a difficult relationship. It comes from the imagined judgment of other people, people whose opinions you have never verified, people who, statistically speaking, are far too absorbed in their own inner chaos to be thinking about you as often as you fear. Epictetus was direct about this. If someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation. In other words, no one controls your emotional world without your cooperation, and approval-seeking is the invitation. Every time you shape your behavior around what others might think, you hand someone else the pen to write your story. This isn't a minor inconvenience. Approval-seeking is one of the most structurally damaging patterns a person can carry through life. It distorts your decisions. You choose careers, partners, and lifestyles based not on what aligns with your values, but on what you believe will generate the least criticism. It corrodes your self-trust, because when your choices are always filtered through others' expectations, you never develop the muscle of trusting your own judgment, and it makes you permanently vulnerable, because approval, by its nature, can always be withdrawn. Here's what approval-seeking actually is beneath its surface. It's a misplaced strategy for safety. Somewhere, early in life, you learned that being accepted by others meant being protected, that fitting in was survival. And your nervous system encoded that lesson so deeply that it still runs the program, decades later, in situations where your literal survival is not remotely at stake. Marcus Aurelius, again a man surrounded by people eager to praise him, wrote privately about the emptiness of reputation. He noted that the people who praised him would die, and their praisers would die, and even the memory of all of it would dissolve into time. Not to make himself feel worthless, but to free himself from the seduction of needing to be admired. The Stoic alternative is not indifference to others. It's indifference to the judgment of others while remaining genuinely invested in their well-being. You can care deeply about people without needing them to approve of you. Those are entirely different orientations. One is love, the other is dependency. The question worth sitting with today: how many of your daily decisions are actually yours? How many are performances for an audience that mostly isn't watching? Because the life you're living to impress others is still your life, and it's the only one you get. Lesson 9. There is a moment in almost every meaningful pursuit where something goes wrong. The plan collapses, the door closes, the person you were counting on disappears, and most people, when that moment arrives, treat it as a signal to stop, as evidence that the path wasn't meant for them, as the universe's verdict on their worthiness. The Stoics saw it completely differently, and their alternative perspective has changed the trajectory of more lives than almost any other idea in this philosophy. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Read that carefully. He's not saying obstacles are pleasant. He's saying they are directional. They don't block the path. They are the path. The resistance itself is the instruction. Think about Thomas Edison, not a Stoic, but someone who embodied this principle perhaps more vividly than anyone. After thousands of failed attempts to create the incandescent light bulb, he reportedly said he hadn't failed, he'd simply found 10,000 ways that didn't work. That reframe is not naive optimism. It's a strategic relationship with failure that transforms every dead end into data. Here's what happens psychologically when you treat obstacles as part of the process rather than interruptions of it. Your nervous system stops sounding the alarm every time difficulty appears. You stop interpreting challenge as catastrophe. You begin to develop what psychologists now call resilience, but what the Stoics would have simply called character. And character, unlike talent or circumstance, is something you build entirely through what you do with what happens to you. The obstacle might be a failed business. The obstacle might be a relationship ending. It might be a health diagnosis that rearranges your priorities overnight. It might be a door so firmly shut that it feels like a wall. But behind every one of those obstacles, if you look carefully, is a redirection, a forced adaptation that takes you somewhere your original route never would have. The most capable, most grounded people you will ever meet are not the ones who encountered the fewest obstacles. They are the ones who encountered the most and developed, through repeated practice, the habit of turning friction into forward motion. You don't get to choose whether difficulty comes. It will come. The only thing within your control, and this brings us back to lesson 1, is what you decide it means and what you decide to do next. The obstacle isn't in your way, it's showing you the way. Let it. Lesson 10. This lesson sounds like a paradox, and that's exactly why most people dismiss it before they understand it. Because we've been trained culturally to think of discipline as restriction, as the thing that limits you, as the joyless, rigid counterpart to freedom and spontaneity. But the Stoics understood something about freedom that most modern conversations miss entirely. Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Think about what that means structurally. If you cannot regulate your impulses, you are not free, you are governed by them. Every craving that pulls you away from your intentions, every emotional reaction that hijacks your decisions, every habit that runs on autopilot while your conscious self watches helplessly. These are not expressions of freedom. They are the opposite of it. They are the invisible chains of an undisciplined mind. Here is the truth about discipline that almost no one tells you. The writer who shows up every morning to write, even when uninspired, they don't feel like it most mornings either. The athlete who trains before dawn in the cold when the bed is warm, they feel resistance too. The difference is not that disciplined people don't have the same impulses as everyone else. The difference is that they have built systems that are stronger than their impulses. And here's the paradox resolved. The more consistently you act from discipline rather than impulse, the more genuine freedom you accumulate. Financial discipline creates economic freedom. Physical discipline creates the freedom of a healthy body. Mental discipline creates the freedom to choose your responses rather than be controlled by your reactions. Every act of discipline is a vote for the person you're becoming, and that person lives in larger and larger spaces of genuine choice. The undisciplined life is not more free, it is more reactive. It is a life lived at the mercy of how you feel on any given morning, which is perhaps the most unpredictable and unstable foundation imaginable. Marcus Aurelius began each morning with the acknowledgement that the day ahead would be difficult. He didn't promise himself it would be easy or pleasant. He simply prepared his mind to meet it with discipline, and from that preparation came the equanimity that his journals reveal page after page. You don't need to overhaul your entire life today, but you do need one area, just one, where you choose discipline over comfort. Because every time you make that choice, you expand the territory of your freedom. One decision at a time, one morning at a time, one chosen difficulty at a time. Lesson 11. Epictetus wrote, "Tell me who you spend time with, and I'll tell you who you're becoming." And before you dismiss this as familiar advice you've heard 100 times, consider the depth of what he was actually pointing to. Not just social influence, but something more subtle and more urgent. You are, at this moment, absorbing the worldview of the people and content that occupy your attention, not consciously, not as a deliberate choice, but constantly, automatically, through a process so ordinary it becomes invisible. The friends who normalize complaining, you start complaining more. The media that feeds outrage, you become more easily outraged. The voices that celebrate cynicism, your hope quietly erodes. And the people who operate from possibility, from discipline, from genuine integrity, you start breathing a little differently when you're around them. The Stoics were meticulous about this. Seneca wrote about choosing his companions the way a physician chooses their tools, deliberately, with full awareness of the effect they would have. He wasn't elitist about it, he was precise about it, because he understood that environment is not neutral. It is always doing something to you, whether you're paying attention or not. This extends well beyond the people in your immediate life. What are you feeding your attention every morning? The first 30 minutes of your day are, neurologically, among the most receptive of the 24 hours. Your brain moves from the diffuse, creative state of early waking into an actively pattern-forming state. And whatever you place in that window begins shaping the lens through which the rest of the day is interpreted. Most people fill that window with social media, news, and notifications, and then they wonder why their baseline anxiety is so high. Guarding your inner circle isn't about building walls or cutting people off dramatically. It's about being intentional with your most finite resource, your attention. Every conversation you invest in, every piece of content you consume, every voice you allow to narrate your internal world is either building your character or quietly eroding it. There is no neutral input. Audit your environment honestly, not to judge others, but to understand yourself. Who leaves you feeling more capable after an interaction? Who leaves you drained, diminished, or more anxious? What content expands your thinking, and what content merely inflames it? These are not rhetorical questions. They are practical diagnostics for one of the most consequential areas of your life. You cannot fully control who enters your life, but you can control who you invest in, and that investment, made daily, quietly determines the person you are slowly becoming. Choose accordingly. Lesson 12. This is the lesson that separates the students of Stoicism from the masters. And it's the one most likely to make you uncomfortable, because it doesn't just ask you to accept what happens, it asks you to love it. Amor fati, Latin for love of fate. The idea, embraced most powerfully by Marcus Aurelius and later by Nietzsche, is this: not merely to tolerate what life delivers, not merely to endure it with gritted teeth, but to embrace it. To find within every experience, including the painful ones, the humiliating ones, the ones that brought you to your knees, something worth loving, not despite the difficulty, because of it. This sounds impossible when you're in the middle of something hard, and I don't want to pretend otherwise. When you're grieving, when you've been betrayed, when something you built with your own hands falls apart, being told to love that feels like an insult. So let's be precise about what amor fati actually means. It doesn't mean you are happy that bad things happened. It means you refuse to wish they hadn't, because wishing against what has already occurred is the least productive activity available to the human mind. The energy you spend in "if only" and "why me" is energy that belongs to the present moment, to the question of what you do now, not the question of why then. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Loss is nothing else but change, and change is nature's delight." He wasn't minimizing loss. He was repositioning it, placing it within the larger context of a universe that is constantly, relentlessly transforming. And within that context, resistance to change isn't wisdom. It's friction with the fundamental nature of existence. Here's where amor fati becomes genuinely transformative. When you stop fighting your past, when you stop arguing with what already happened, you free up an extraordinary amount of mental and emotional energy. That energy, redirected toward the present, becomes creativity. It becomes resilience. It becomes the surprising ability to find meaning in places you never would have looked if life had stayed comfortable. The most remarkable people often have the most fractured histories, not because suffering is a prerequisite for greatness, but because those who have learned to love their fate rather than curse it develop a depth of character that comfort simply cannot produce. Your life, in its entirety, including the parts that broke you, is the exact raw material you need for the person you are becoming. Nothing was wasted, nothing was accidental. Love what happened to you, not because it was easy, but because it was yours. Lesson 13. You've made it to the final lesson, and it's not a technique, it's not a practice you add to your morning routine, it's a realization, one that the previous 12 lessons have been quietly building toward, about what you fundamentally are. Throughout this video, you've encountered 12 different angles on the same essential truth: that external events do not have inherent power over you, that your thoughts are not facts, that pain is a messenger, that discipline is liberation, that even fate itself can be loved. These weren't separate lessons. They were 12 facets of a single diamond, and this final lesson is the diamond itself. The Stoics called it the hegemonikon, the ruling faculty, the sovereign self, the part of you that observes, evaluates, and chooses. It is the seat of your freedom, the ground of your dignity, and the one aspect of your existence that cannot be taken from you by any external force without your consent. Epictetus, the former slave, understood this more viscerally than any philosopher who ever lived. His body was owned, his labor was commanded, his physical freedom was entirely controlled by others. And yet he was, by his own account, freer than the men who held his chains, because his mind, his values, his judgment, his response to circumstance, these remained entirely and irrevocably his own. The emperors of his era commanded armies. Epictetus commanded himself, and he would argue that his mastery was the greater achievement. The unshakable self is not someone who never feels fear, grief, doubt, or anger. It is someone who has built a relationship with those feelings rather than being ruled by them. Someone who has practiced imperfectly and persistently the habit of returning to their own center, regardless of how far the storm carries them, because the storm always passes. And the person who built something solid in the quiet before it arrives finds themselves standing when others are still searching for their footing. This is not an identity you arrive at permanently. It is a practice you return to daily. Marcus Aurelius, emperor, philosopher, Stoic, spent his entire life in that practice. His journals aren't the writings of someone who had mastered himself. They are the writings of someone who was committed to the process of mastering himself. That distinction is important. Perfection was never the destination. Daily return to principle was the destination. So here is what the last 2,000 years of Stoic philosophy actually asks of you. Not that you become someone else, not that you suppress your humanity, only this, that you decide today and again tomorrow to be the author of your inner world rather than the passive recipient of it. The world will keep sending storms, it always has, but somewhere inside you right now there is something that does not bend, something that has survived every hard thing that came before this moment, something that, when properly tended, cannot be shaken. That is not a promise. That is not a hope. That is a Stoic truth, one that Marcus Aurelius carried into battle, that Epictetus carried through slavery, that Seneca carried to the end of his life. And now it belongs to you. It always did. You just needed the reminder. Marcus Aurelius didn't write his journals for an audience. He wrote them as a daily promise to himself, to keep returning, to keep trying, to keep becoming. That's all any of us can do. If this video felt like a step in that direction, leave a comment below. Write, "I choose my mind." And if you want to keep walking this path, subscribe to the Stoic Mode and turn on notifications, because this is only the beginning. More lessons, more clarity, more of the philosophy that actually changes how you live. Thank you for being here. Now go apply something